Don't fall for the Trump regime's smoke and mirrors and sleight of hand when they claim they've produced all of the Epstein files on Friday. Sure, they produced about 3 million documents, but 3 million more documents are still missing, are still being concealed. And it's my view that the Trump regime is withholding those 3 million documents, which I think are the most significant and damning documents. They're withholding them, in my view, on the basis of phony privilege claims, making claims of things called deliberative process privilege, attorney-client privilege, work product privilege, executive privilege. In a previous filing before two federal judges earlier this week, federal Judge Engelmeyer and federal Judge Berman, Trump's DOJ previewed that they would be withholding documents and records. They stated that at some later date, they didn't give the date at the time, they said they would be producing the Epstein files and records, but they said, pursuant to the Epstein Transparency Act, we will be withholding certain documents on the basis of privilege claims. Now, the Epstein Transparency Act does not permit the Trump DOJ to withhold documents and evidence on the basis of privilege claims. The Epstein Transparency Act simply says you have to produce every document in the Epstein files, but you can do redactions of victims' and survivors' names, identities, faces, photos, and personal identifying information to prevent victims and survivors from being re-traumatized. But the Epstein Transparency Act doesn't say you can withhold documents on the basis of privilege. Further, the Epstein Transparency Act says that the Trump DOJ needed to produce a report about redactions that were made and what was being withheld with specificity 15 days after December 19th. December 19th was the date under the Epstein Transparency Act where all of the documents were supposed to be turned over. So far, the Trump DOJ on Friday only produced 3 million documents. They claim that there were 6 million documents they collected, and they just claim the other 3 million documents don't meet the criteria of the Epstein Transparency Act. What does that mean? It does not meet the criteria. If you read the filing they made earlier this week, they talk about privilege claims. And you see, my view, having reviewed all 3 million documents on Friday, there were significant documents missing. The indictment of Epstein, in my view, I didn't see it. That was missing. Important victim and survivor statements to the FBI, that was missing. Lots of memos, internal memos from the United States attorneys in the Southern District of New York and the Southern District of Florida were missing. Internal FBI memos were missing. Transcriptions of phone calls, transcriptions of videos, all of that was missing from the 3 million documents that were produced. Now, there were some bombshells in the 3 million documents that were produced. So you may be asking, well, Ben, what kind of cover-up is it if they released some pretty damaging documents, right? There were some memos and some documents that describe real disgusting conduct, grotesque conduct of people like Donald Trump and Elon Musk, the owner of the Giant, Steve Tisch, Bill Gates, other people. I mean, there was some really horrific conduct that was being driven. Howard Lutnick. Well, one of the things that I learned as a litigator is that when we were fighting against really bad defendants, criminal defendants, and just horrible people, at first they would try to obstruct and not turn over documents and records. Then when you compelled them to turn it over, their next step was to kind of build a moat around the real damning documents, the real smoking guns. So what they would do is they would do a document dump of millions of documents, and they would put in there some documents that were damaging to themselves or to their client, so that you would say, well, if they turned over these documents, then that's probably it. But that was part of their strategy to get you to look away from the other documents that were still being hidden and concealed. And one of the ways as a litigator I would be able to determine what else was being hidden and concealed is I would say, were there any third parties that turned over documents that looked different or are additive to what was produced. And if there was, I would say that was one of the hints that there were documents that were missing. So here, with the Epstein files produced by the DOJ, to me, it's notable that the Epstein estate produced all of these documents and records that had lots of photographs on it. Remember all the photos that they had with Trump on these photos and other people, those real creepy and grotesque photos? Why is it that in the recent DOJ production, those photos and documents are missing? Why are some of the other Epstein estate documents missing? And so when you compare them, it's clear that there's major documents missing. And as I noted, Epstein indictment stuff is missing, witness statements missing, FBI memos, DOJ memos that are missing, 302 statements, which is FBI victim statements that are missing. So I think we need to look for that. I want to show you more of the parameters of the cover-up here. And remember right now, when people say, oh, well, the Trump DOJ produced the files on Friday, remind them, no, there's 3 to 5 million records that are still missing, at least in my opinion. Well, here was Donald Trump's Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche at a press conference on Friday, and here he admits that the DOJ collected 6 million pages of documents, but they're only releasing 3 million. Listen to what he says here. Play this clip.
He erred on the side of over-collecting of materials from various sources to best ensure maximum transparency and compliance, which necessarily means that the number of responsive pages is significantly smaller than the total number of pages initially collected. That's why I mentioned a moment ago, we're releasing more than 3 million pages today and not the 6 million pages that we collected.
And then when Todd Blanche was asked about what communications he's had with the White House regarding the release of these files, look how flustered he gets and he starts stuttering. And you can see that he's obviously lying right here. Let's play this clip.
On Epstein, sir, if I may just ask one on that, please. You mentioned a letter to Congress. How and to whom did you notify the White House about the production that you're announcing today before you came out and spoke to us?
How did I do what?
Notify the White House. What was your interface with the White House? You said there's a letter to Congress. Who did you update at the White House about this?
Well, I don't know. I don't really understand the question. You mean who did I update?
Did you provide them an explanation of what today's release would be?
Look, my team has certain communications with the White House. Let me just be clear. They had nothing to do with this review. They had no oversight over this review. They did not tell this department how to do our review, what to look for, what to redact, what to not redact. They absolutely knew that I was doing this press conference today and that we were releasing the materials today. But there's not, there's no oversight by the White House into the process that we've undertaken over the past 60 days.
I also found it notable that Attorney General Pam Bondi was not there at that press conference, and that Todd Blanche was not flanked by any other United States attorneys or FBIs. You have Blanche, the same guy who interviewed Ghislaine Maxwell, right, where she lied through her teeth. Blanche, who was Donald Trump's criminal defense lawyer before becoming the number 2 at the DOJ. He's Trump's personal criminal defense lawyer, was the only person there. How odd is that? Wouldn't, in normal circumstances, you'd have all these deputies and assistant United States attorneys, and wouldn't you be flanked by the FBI and other people if you were doing such a courageous thing? The fact that people weren't there is also telling me that there's a massive cover-up taking place. And remember, as I mentioned, there's this document, January 27, 2026, that letter by the DOJ to Berman and Engelmeyer, 2 federal judges in the Southern District of New York, telling them that there are documents that are being withheld on the grounds of privilege, and that's one of the reasons why some documents are not being turned over. And it specifically says documents are not being turned over for privilege and privacy concerns. I want you to listen to the lawyer for Epstein survivors talking about how sloppy this document production has been. Play this clip.
You know, it's consistent with what we've been seeing from the Department of Justice for quite some time now. And I've sort of called this, it's like an incompetent cover-up. It's clear they're trying to cover up documents. They're trying to withhold documents. They're trying to keep things from the public. But worse, the things that they're supposed to be keeping from the public, they're not good at keeping from the public. I mean, it's a cover-up. it's nonsense, really. It's just a pure incompetence.
I think that's an important point because the Trump DOJ is going to claim the reason that these additional 3 million records and documents are not being produced is to support the victims or help the victims or whatever. But from the 3 million documents that were produced, the victims' names really weren't redacted effectively, and lots of victims and survivors were re-traumatized. We heard from the lawyer, Brad Edwards, from the group of survivors as well, saying that this is an ultimate betrayal of the survivors and the victims. Expect the survivors and the victims to sue the DOJ. They're going to file a lawsuit soon, I'll bet you, for leaking their names and providing identifying information in violation of the Epstein Transparency Act. The Epstein survivors issued a joint statement calling out the Trump regime's sloppy handling and continued cover-up. And here's what Congressmember Garcia has to say. Play this clip.
Donald Trump and the Department of Justice just made it clear right now that they intend to withhold approximately 50% or half of the Epstein files, while claiming to have fully complied with the law. This is outrageous and incredibly concerning. Now, the Oversight Committee subpoena, which we have had in place now since the summer, had directed the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and the Department of Justice to release all the files to our committee, of course, while also protecting our survivors. They are now in violation of that law.
And here's what Congressmember Ro Khanna has to say. Let's play this clip.
Well, look, I am glad that documents are being released. I'm going to be looking at whether the appropriate documents were released. What are we looking for? The FBI statements. We need to see whether the 302 forms are being released. That's where the survivors mention who the other rich and powerful men are who abused or raped them. We know from even Maxwell that there are many other men who cut secret deals. Who are these people? Those are in the 302 files. And second, are the prosecution memos being released? This is the document that shows why these rich and powerful men weren't prosecuted.
And Congressmember Subramanian says something similar as well.
One of the things that I'm noticing is what's not in the files. As you just mentioned, the DOJ has said that they had over 6 million files, but they're only releasing about 3 to 3.5. And we want to know, where are the other 3 million files? Why are they withholding them? There's some files that are missing in here. I'm talking about the indictment that was prepared against Jeffrey Epstein before he was given the sweetheart deal, as well as the memorandum in support of that, talking about interviews with victims and witnesses, talking about his crimes and also how they were covered up. And so there's a lot that's missing in here so far, and there's no indication that any of that is in here. And so, again, I go back to August, which is when the Oversight Committee issued a subpoena asking for all of the documents to be released to us, and go back to last March, which is when they said they had all the documents ready to release, and all of them were redacted already and ready to go. And so there's something fishy happening again with this Department of Justice, and they need to be held accountable.
So speaking of redactions, they did say that they redacted across the board women's faces. They said that members of Congress who were interested in seeing unredacted files could give them a call and see them. Is that something you intend to do?
Oh, certainly. I mean, and just more than that, they forgot to redact or failed to redact more victim identifying information in this batch as well. We've seen a few instances already, and in the last one, they did the same. And so, they've said this is the reason to withhold files, yet it's happening again. And then we also want to know, what are they withholding too, right? What information are they not releasing because they feel like it's not necessary? I think this cherry picking of the release is just as concerning as what's in here.
And as Seth Abrams says, former criminal defense attorney here, if what we've seen of the Epstein files so far, heavily redacted and with 3 million pages still missing, is bad, Keep in mind that the files in full are 100 times worse. That's how this works. You're seeing the G-rated version of this, which I agree with. And Congresswoman Presley says, Trump's DOJ is lying and violating the law. They claim they released the Epstein files, but there are 3 million pages missing. They don't care about accountability for survivors, only about protecting pedophiles like Donald Trump. Release all the files. And notice that they make certain people kind of the fall guy and put them out there as well. People who are grotesque and involved in it, but like they released a lot of documents showing Howard Lutnick had all of these connections and communications with Epstein. Elon Musk would write to Epstein, what day and night will be the wildest party on your island? Elon Musk to Epstein. Also, Epstein canceled Musk's island visit on one occasion, not the opposite way around. In a 2012 email chain, Kimball Musk, the brother of Elon Musk, is warned not to harm Jeffrey Epstein's girl, identified as Jennifer, and Kimball responds by agreeing and says he's enjoying the time with her. Here's what Elon Musk said recently, or before the election, when he was right around the election, when he was on with Tucker Carlson about how he believes that if Trump didn't win, he would probably get arrested. Here, play this clip.
If he loses, man, what?
You're fucked, dude. I'm fucked. If he loses, I'm fucked.
It does seem that way. You can't just be like,
Yeah, I'm like, how long do you think my prison sentence is going to be? Do you think? Will I see my children?
And so you see it's cover up after cover up after cover up, covering up the Epstein files. And now they said they've released 3 million out of 6 million documents, and there are heavy redactions, and the survivors are absolutely livid because their names weren't redacted. So what the heck is being redacted? It's an absolute travesty what they've done in covering up this child sex trafficking ring. And we can't really even trust what they've produced. They're covering up Donald Trump's health, his cognitive and physical rot before our eyes. We see him deteriorate, and then they keep on coming up with these excuses that literally make no sense. They're covering up ICE and Border Patrol murdering Americans and other people who are in this country. They're covering up Donald Trump's war crimes off the coast of Venezuela, these fishing boats that have continued to be blown up there and in the Pacific. And they're refusing to release the video footage and think that we're all just going to forget about it, of the double tap strike or the double strike of individuals who survived the first round of the war crimes on the Venezuelan fishing boat. And we saw a Senate hearing where Senator Kaine said, I wish we could talk about what's happening, but the Trump regime is claiming everything is classified. So we can't even bring it up in this hearing with Marco Rubio. And boy, did Marco Rubio look weird during that hearing. He was like sweating. He looked like he was putting things into his mouth as he was chugging water. Very strange behavior, but that's what we've come to expect, sadly, from the Trump regime. Let's bring in Democratic Congressmember Dan Goldman from New York. Congressmember, it's great to see you. It's cover up after cover up. Your skill set as a former federal prosecutor seems well suited to trying to smoke out each of these cover ups taking place. Well, why don't we start with each of them? You and I were talking about Epstein really before lots of people were, 9 months ago or so. You and I were, you wrote the letter, we broke the story where you called them out and you said, here's what's going to happen. And what you've said seems to be exactly what went down. And then on Friday, they released files which mentioned Trump's name over and over again. Todd Blanche is saying, but it's not in a bad way. And then the survivors are livid. What do you make of it all?
Well, the first thing that's really remarkable is that we've been hearing so much about all the efforts and the hours and the prosecutors and the agents who've been going through these files to redact them. And this is after there were reports that all the way back last March, that there were thousands of hours of man hours of going through and redacting. And now they're late, ostensibly complying with the law, almost a month and a half late, because they had so much to redact. And then they come out with it and the redactions are all messed up. So first of all, that's incredibly problematic and actually against the law, the Victims Protection Act. You have to redact victims' identification information. But it is also unbelievably sloppy and dangerous. And it just reflects the fact that it undermines this whole notion that they've been spending so much time doing that. So it confirms that this is all just a cover up. And they're continuing to cover up because only half of the documents are released. I don't understand why they get to decide without explanation why half would be held back. And Donald Trump's name is all over it. So now we know why there was such a cover up, and they can't even do that well. So what we have now is clearly still trying to cover it up, doing it poorly, putting up a document that lists in great detail complaints from people who have clearly called into a tip line that includes Donald Trump raping a 13 or 14-year-old. Now, we don't know if that is true, but that is what is in the allegations. And Todd Blanche is saying there's nothing to see here. I mean, come on. This is exactly why they've been covering this up. They don't do it well because they're incompetent, but they're still trying to do it. And because they don't do it well, we know much more than what they want us to know. So we know there's a lot of smoke there. And they're still trying to gaslight us and cover it up. It's really outrageous. And, I'm just starting to go through a lot of these documents like you are, but I have not seen any videos. I don't know if there are any photos. There certainly would be that in the files and the information. And you can easily redact a victim's face, as we saw the Epstein estate do with photos with Donald Trump and a bunch of young women.
Let's talk about Trump's mental and cognitive decline and the cover up there. Same thing with what you see with the Epstein files. I mean, in the sense of different stories every day. First, he got an MRI, then it really wasn't an MRI, and then it's just one thing after another. But we see what we see. I mean, Donald Trump, in the speech he gave in Iowa, he said that China was going to send to his desk a bill that he was going to sign into law. A few weeks back in Davos, he confused Iceland with Greenland and said he was going to invade Iceland. He keeps repeatedly keeps on bragging about cognitive exams. I mean, it is so obvious that this individual is cognitively and physically deteriorating before our eyes. And to me, this should be one of the biggest stories. Yet, we cover it all the time here, but it seems like it's one of those things. That's just Trump being Trump.
No, and given especially recently, not too long ago, where Joe Biden's every word was scrutinized and ridiculed and commented on by both the media and the other elected officials, it is quite remarkable that we're not hearing anything when, honestly, the symptoms are very similar. There are some times when Donald Trump seems cogent and coherent, and there are a lot of other times when he does not at all. And that is the sign of senility. That is the sign of old age. You layer on that, Ben, and with his hands and the bruising and the swollen ankles, and his walk seems off kilter. I think it's very clear that he is under some health concerns, and we don't know anything about it. We don't even know whether it was a CAT scan or an MRI. You don't get a full body MRI that he explained. So that he said. So they seem as well to be covering up some of his health conditions and health issues that he's quite obviously going through.
Now, as a former federal prosecutor, it must just be additionally tragic, not just as someone who supports the rule of law as you do, but as someone who worked in the DOJ, who worked in a federal prosecutor's office in New York, to see what the DOJ has become. And I'm not speaking from a partisan lens. I mean, as a law professor, you would always tell your students one of the most noble job paths is to start off working at the DOJ because they were the best law firm in the country, regardless of who was in office. These were sharp lawyers, top law schools doing great work. And now it's an embarrassment when they show up in front of federal judges from all parties, whether it's Trump appointees, George W. Bush appointees, Reagan appointees. They've been writing these scathing orders saying, y'all are just bad lawyers. You keep violating the law over and over again, and enough is enough. And then the DOJ, like Trump's personal law firms would always do, they just whine about missing deadlines and the whole thing. You layer on top of that what's going on in Minnesota, Minneapolis, and St. Paul and across the country with killings of American citizens and migrants, just people in this country from ICE and Border Patrol, and the constant cover-ups, the defamation of the victims after being deceased. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, let's focus on the immigration stuff. I mean, you and I have talked at length about the very dangerous and downright scary politicization of this Department of Justice. And we've spoken about how the first thing that the United States government says to other countries who are trying to build democracies is the first thing they need to do in order to start having an economic relationship with us or the democratic Western world is not prosecute their adversaries. And that is exactly what Donald Trump is doing. But it is now doubly worse because of what's going on in Minneapolis. And this is, to me, really, really scary because you have these masked, rogue, untrained, out of control ICE and CBP agents who are clearly using excessive violence, unnecessary violence. And that's before we talk about the two murders. So, but then after the two murders happen, the FBI cuts out their partners on the state level and then closes the investigation of the murders. So you have a scenario where ICE is totally out of control, violating all sorts of any policy they may have and the law. And then there's no accountability because there's no even a criminal investigation. So now they know that they're just operating with impunity, that they're invincible. And when you put the two together, that is fascism. That is fascism, where you have the state-sponsored government terrorizing and violently attacking citizens, and they're doing it without any accountability from the FBI. And this is now another layer of this dangerous, and it's beyond politicization. It is authoritarian. It is fascist. And I'm going to call it out because that is what it is. I am not inciting political violence. I want to be very clear. I am responding to political violence and to excessive violence and to no accountability.
And the tool of fascism, as I mentioned at the outset, is the constant Russian nesting doll game, which is probably an apt analysis here. It's the constant look the other way, find some pretext to just push through your authoritarian agenda. The authoritarian doesn't go out there and just always say, I'm the authoritarian, but they look for just that sliver so that they have some justification to do whatever it is they want. I mean, we see that right now with the United States and Canada in Alberta, the Trump regime supporting a secessionist movement in Alberta as Trump wants to pursue the 51st state stuff. And that's exactly what Putin does with Donbass. You know, the way Putin attacks journalists, Trump's, it's out of the same book. And I think that's why we see cover up, and it follows the exact same pattern of thousands of years of what authoritarians would do. It's not new. It's just new in the United States that it's so blatant and obvious. So before we go, I mean, what do we do? There's a lot of Americans this weekend who they see Don Lemon getting arrested. They see ICE attacking people on the streets and murdering them. What do we do? Do you still feel hopeful? I mean, Trump's approval is tanking. It's 37%. Like, can we win this fight?
Well, look, I think we we are set up very well to win the election in November, but we can't wait until then. What is going on now every day is an absolute travesty that is descending our country into something that at some point we're not going to be able to so easily reclaim. And your analogy and analysis of how similar it is to Vladimir Putin is spot on. You forgot to mention, well, you didn't forget, but there's so many things that he called the oil executives before he told Congress that he was going in with the military to take out Maduro. So just like Vladimir Putin communicates with his oligarchs rather than the Knesset, Donald Trump is doing the same thing. And we have always seen for 10 years this really, really unusual, suspicious, and scary obsession with Vladimir Putin that Donald Trump has. And now we are seeing Vladimir Putin's playbook playing out right now. And what drives me absolutely crazy, Ben, is the silence of the Republicans. That, yes, now after 2 blatant murders by ICE with no accountability, they're calling hearings. And some have said, a couple moderates or retiring members have said that Kristi Noem should be removed, and she should be removed yesterday. This is absolutely unbelievable, the degree to which she is lying, et cetera. But they're just silent as they're watching this presidency, this government, Stephen Miller and his master plan here completely take over the government and use it to terrorize Americans, residents all over the country. And part of what we have to do is continue to make our voices heard. Today, for example, I'm trying to instill some accountability. I introduced a bill that would eliminate qualified immunity for these CBP and ICE agents. So if a civil suit is filed against them, they can be held liable and held accountable, even though it is not the same as criminal accountability. But we need to be creative. We need to be aggressive. We need to be out there. We need to be speaking up. And we need to be reaching out to Republican members of Congress who are in the majority, who control the hearings, who control subpoenas, who control the floor of the House. We need them to actually pass legislation. We need them, and you're seeing it as we are standing up for the people around this country by refusing to fund the Department of Homeland Security until significant changes are made. We have to use whatever leverage we have, and that includes the upcoming election, that includes the filibuster. Whatever opportunities we have to use our leverage and use it aggressively, because we cannot allow this to continue.
Congressman, appreciate you as always. Appreciate you from the very beginning, calling exactly what the cover-up was going to look like by the Trump regime in your letter back several months ago. We appreciate the work you're doing on the Hill.
Yeah, thanks. And I will add one other, if we're talking about predictions, the interplay between what is going on with ICE and DOJ and the election interference tactics that this administration is using is now very direct and I think very scary. Pam Bondi offered to withdraw ICE if Tim Walz gave the federal government Minnesota's voter rolls. There's no reason for the federal government to have Minnesota's voter rolls other than to purge them. They raided the Fulton County Board of Elections to seize 2020 voter rolls. We're in 2026. That's outside the 5-year statute of limitations. And Tulsi Gabbard is there in the intelligence community, which does no prosecution. So these efforts are very intertwined in trying to create chaos, create violence, so that Donald Trump might have a rationale to invoke the Insurrection Act. And then he will say, oh, with this invasion and insurrection, we can't possibly have elections. But if that doesn't work, then they're going to go through the voter rolls and they're going to try to purge the voter rolls. I introduced an amendment last week that would prohibit the Department of Homeland Security in this bill from seizing any voter rolls, any voting machines. And we ought to include that amendment in this Department of Homeland Security bill, because it is very clear they are coming after the November 2026 election because they know they cannot win it, and they will not stop. They will literally do anything they can to rig that election. And so we have to be on alert now, and we got to be focused on it. And I really hope that the Senate puts in that my amendment so that we keep the Department of Homeland Security away from our voter rolls and our voting machines.
New York Congressman Dan Goldman, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Everybody hit subscribe. Let's get to 6 million subscribers.
Want to stay plugged in? Become a subscriber to our Substack at MeidasPlus.com. You'll get daily recaps from Ron Filipkowski, ad-free episodes of our podcast, and more exclusive content only available at MeidasPlus.com.